Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Get in the Garage. I am your host, Mike, here with my man, Luke. And today we have a very special guest, a good dear friend of ours, musician extraordinaire, Mr. Jeff May. What's up, Jeff?
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on in. Today we decided what we will discuss is prog rock.
Prog. We're getting proggy.
We're getting proggy. I think we're looking forward to it because we have kind of three different perspectives.
Yeah, different perspectives.
Very different.
Yeah. Jeff described himself.
At times.
Jeff's described himself coming in as being the hammer to right the wrong.
I plan to be like how CNN has conservative viewpoints just so that they have something to battle over because they have to fill 24 hours of time. I like prog rock, but I don't love it.
Yeah.
So I mean that's it, and I have my reasons, and we're gonna talk about them.
Yeah. So going into things, maybe Luke can kind of take over.
Please.
Okay.
In the maybe like the origin story of prog rock, because before we have prog, we have psychedelic rock.
Okay.
I think that's kind of like the precursor and kind of Luke's bread and butter.
All right. So I think I can point to like at least like a couple albums that are like this is why this happened, and a couple people. So one I would instantly say is like Bob Dylan.
Okay.
So like Bob Dylan comes in and he's writing like imagery songs, right? So like, wave with one hand spinning, laughing, silhouetted by the sea. It's that kind of more. It's poetic and it's not like it's not twist and shout.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, you have like that. I feel like is the first thing. So and also Dylan expands the song form in rock that had been like in folk, but he kind of melded that with that lyric.
Yeah.
I feel like so that's like the first thing. The second thing would be Sgt. Pepper's and Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds first though.
Yeah.
So like Brian Wilson is like, I'm gonna make an album that you don't dance to, that you listen to. To get your rocks off.
Yeah.
So that idea of listening to a record and using the studio, right? And before him would be Phil Spector, who was the first guy to kind of use the studio art formed as in that nature, where he's like, I'm painting. Like, this isn't for live. That was the other thing. Like, it wasn't for live. It was like, do it for the gram, do it for the album.
Right.
So that was like the whole purpose. And then Sgt. Pepper's after that with like, especially like A Day in the Life on that album, that's like pretty proggy for that point in time. And then I feel like outward grows the psychedelia, and I feel like we'll talk about that a little bit more, especially in Pink Floyd's case, who were highly psychedelic before they were prog.
Yeah.
So,
Pink Floyd's, I think people forget that Pink Floyd does kind of fall under the prog rock umbrella.
Oh, I did not forget.
No.
Have you ever listened to their first 4 albums?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, Uma Guma is like some rough stuff.
A lot of avant-garde, risk-taking recorded material.
Right.
Yeah, like some of this is going to be bad.
Like 5 minutes of tape delay sounds. I mean, that's a song, and that's very much in the kind of the 20th century classical elements that play into prog rock.
Yeah.
A lot of kind of atonal things, or changing key signatures,
and
changing time signatures, and all of those types of things, especially going back to the Beatles and that psychedelic stuff, using Baroque forms and classical music stuff. Brian Wilson was heavy into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
using like harpsichord.
Yeah, so those are all,
like that.
In my opinion, super strong elements of prog rock in general, are that kind of like orchestral classical music type of thing.
And that would kind of give rise to, I think, what we would call as the classic prog rock bands like Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, like that kind of wave. Because a lot of it was like these English kids who like went to music conservatories, and stuff like that, who have this very strict and rigid kind of classical training,
Right.
that they had to adhere to, but they also loved like Elvis. So,
right.
You know what I mean? Like they wanted to add some volume and some, different kind of elements. Like it's like classical music that swings.
Right.
So that was the goal.
I wanted to, so like that's like a little bit of like the background. But like, what was your first experiences? That's what, like, I think that's curious.
With prog rock?
Yeah, like, when did you like know it was a thing, and like, how would you have gotten into it? Because like, we just kind of like laid out pretty like accessible bands. like
Yeah.
that everybody loves, that were the driving force of that movement of rock. So like I think it's interesting what was accessible to like, to you. Like, like how did you get into it? Like what was the first thing where you're like, oh yeah, I guess I might be into prog?
Well, my first, I guess, exposure to that genre in a deep sense was the Dark Side of the Moon album by Pink Floyd. I got that. It was probably the first CD that I bought with my own money. I was like 13 years old.
Yeah.
So it was $10 at Walmart or $8 at Walmart. And I was going through that phase of discovering music and basically, going on the internet and looking up the 100 greatest X ... albums of all time and just listening to a variety of things before streaming. So you had to go out and buy it.
Yeah.
But Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, and in the same kind of summer or same period, 2112 by Rush.
Yep.
Because that was on a list of, the 25 greatest guitar albums of the 70s or something
Yeah,
I read
right.
in some magazine.
Yeah.
And then I tried to discover new things I had never heard of. I didn't have that music played in my house growing up. So
Yeah.
Do you think it expanded you to further listen to more prog, or at least like the long format? Because I mean, Dark Side of the Moon is like literally almost one song if you kind of think about it in that sense.
Yeah.
It's a sit. I mean, when I listen to it, I want to sit and listen to the whole thing. Like if I hear "Breathe" on the radio, I'm like, okay, like where's the next one? Because now you're like psyched me up to hear the whole thing because it's that great.
Yeah, I mean, I started to go deep on some of those bands, the archetypal bands, the Pink Floyd, Yes, Rush, King Crimson, some of the Frank Zappa stuff that I think is definitely very much in the progressive rock, quote, quote, vein of everything.
Yep.
So listening to those albums and really consuming those starting from the age of 13, 14 through 16, 17, that was a lot of the music I was listening to. I bought a guitar. I started to learn guitar. So these are riffs you learn. I mean, I hate them, but I should say I hate some of them. But I know the 4 big Jethro Tull hits. I can't stand to listen to, but I learned them on guitar because everyone learned these songs.
Sitting on a park bench.
So I mean, the progressive rock, especially when you pick up a guitar and you learn to play guitar when you're 13. Half of everything that you read about or you talk about with other guitar players can be categorized under prog rock.
Yeah.
Because it's what people hear as virtuosic and things to aspire to. And
that's like the other aspect I don't think we touched on is the how well played everything is. Everyone's a virtuoso. Everybody. And that's like one of the crazier things about the genre as well, is it's not really accessible to everybody to play.
Yeah, it's it can be challenging.
I mean,
in that way.
What did you listen to first, Mike?
I kind of backtracked because really, like, when I started getting guitar heavy, I, as people know, was like really into metal and stuff, and then I got switched on to 2 bands that I can give examples of, is like, say, Between the Buried and Me and Opeth.
Yeah.
Between the Buried and Me, an American band, I think from North Carolina, that have been categorized as like artcore, art deathcore, whatever. But I listened to it and I'm like, yeah, this is just prog rock, really. It's just really heavy prog rock. Opeth, in contrast, has much more of that kind of Scandinavian metal approach. And I think in the beginning, with them, their sound, it was very much true to that sort of Swedish death metal form, where they kind of ended up later in their career evolving and kind of doing much more of a Deep Purple-y, rainbowy kind of inspired thing. So that's kind of where it started. And then eventually, just as a byproduct of playing guitar and getting into more kind of complicated guitar things, whatever, technique, scales, whatever, you can't help but kind of listen to Yes. I mean, you know what I mean? Genesis never really did it for me. And in preparation for the podcast, I'm like, I have this cool pressing. It's like Genesis. It's the album Foxtrot and the album Nursery Crime on like one double LP. It was released as like a compilation thing in like the 80s on
for
vinyl.
free. Just get rid of it. No.
And it's just, oh man, it was hard. It was hard.
Nursery Crime itself is a perfect example of that highfalutin, ironic album name that seemingly every prog rock has 5 albums that have these super corny names.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I would say in that way, and then obviously discovering Pink Floyd, kind of the other side of the coin in terms of the approach to like. In other words, it was like I listened to prog metal, and then I went to prog rock, and then I kind of broadened my scope to say, okay, just progressive music as a whole in varying forms. You know what I mean?
I am the exact opposite of like both of you. I was like hated this genre, but that I had truly never listened to.
Yeah.
Right. So I listened to like what I would say was punk in high school. Like what I liked, I kind of was into like 70s punk. I was never into like modern punk, so I was like never in a scene of this nature.
Jeff also loves Green Day like the rest of us.
No, definitely not.
Dookie over here.
I'm more of a Nimrod guy.
Listen, warning is where it's at, so we all know. All right. Anyway, yeah, I didn't listen to any of that, and I was very stubborn, and I would highly classify myself as a music snob.
Yeah.
Hard music snob, which I get called that now, but listen, guys, I just got I have taste. So anyway,
It's a taste.
no, different strokes for different folks is what I'm really saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm trying to be humorous, but so I hated it. And really, what it was like Mike, kind of when I like first started hanging out with Mike. Mike was like, "Hey man, you like Black Sabbath?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like Black Sabbath. I love Black Sabbath." And he's like, "Yeah, me too, man." And then we kind of bonded on that. And then we started listening to like Mountain, and then we listened to Cream, and then like because we started like listening to all these bands together, we really got into like heavy rock, proto metal together. Like we were just kind of like opened up that door. We're like, well, what else is like Black Sabbath? And then from Black Sabbath, who also got rather proggy at some points, we kind of like kept growing, and then we'd go to the record store together and be like, well, what's up with Yes? Like, you know what I mean? Because like all these bands, they kind of played together, existed together, coexisted. And then I think me and Mike kind of were like, well, like, especially me, and I kept getting wrong. Like someone would give me an album and be like, try it, you'll like it. And then I'd listen to it and I was like, oh crap. So, and then at some point, I think my wall just came down where I was like, yeah, I do like Ted Nugent. And I do like Yes, and I guess I like King Crimson, and all the I guess like Zappa never did it for me, but you know what I'm saying? Like it kind of all came in that.
You're a Hot Rats kind of guy, though. You can get into that one album at the very least.
That's incredibly proggy. I would probably say that's like his most like straightforward proggy, like in that nature. Because it's not as weird. Like, but that's why I don't like Frank Zappa. It's too weird. It's just too absurd sometimes.
Yeah, he covers
the whole thing is like a Monty Python movie that I don't want to watch.
Yeah.
All right. But so, yeah, we kind of like laid it out, like how we got introduced, like especially like for me too, like I made those connections with the Beach Boys, the Beatles, and psychedelia, especially from Cream. Like Cream for me was like so mind opening to like every other form of music in the rock sphere.
Yeah, and that I think is the other side of the coin, which is like on one side of it you have Yes, you have Genesis, you have the quintessential prog rock bands. On the other side of that, you have like the Grateful Dead. You have bands that also did long form songs,
right?
But there was a basic kind of shell of the song, and there was a lot of exploration allowed within the confines of the song, as opposed to say how Yes would play a song that's intensely complex, but they would play it the same way every single time,
just
front to back.
Precision and all laid out. All their arrangements are so tight.
Right. So it's like if Beethoven wrote rock and roll, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like that's what they were going for. Like the Yes album was at the fourth. No, I mean I don't even know what album that is. I mean I could probably figure it out.
Maybe
in a
like
second.
third or fourth.
Okay, now I want to know because it's the first, second, third's the Yes album, fourth is it's the fifth album, I think.
Okay.
So anyway, the fifth album by Yes, the Yes album, it's got that green cover. That's only 3 songs. That's a whole movement.
Yeah.
Like it's just that's what it is. It's like
and
it's also meant to be listened to.
Yeah.
In that, and also like I want to talk too. I wanted to say like what will lend itself to prog. I feel like initially as well to take off as a genre was the format of vinyl, which we all know that like I'm heavily into. Like, but like that. I mean, because like when I'm in the car, like prog's not as accessible in the car. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you kind of have to make the time to listen to it, which kind of leads into something we were talking about earlier, which was like, when I discovered prog rock, it was it was a new thing for me, so I was very gluttonous with it, and I just like consume. But now that it's been a little bit of a while, and I went back to start listening to prog rock again, like we said, it's kind of like a chore, and I don't mean to.
As the kids are saying, it hit different.
Yeah. But it's kind of exhausting. It's like I don't have 25 minutes to listen to one song.
So are you telling me at the older age, Dad Mike was like, prog's a little much?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I still love it. Like, okay, we put my son to bed. My wife, she paints, so she went into her room and started painting and stuff. And, I kind of had like an hour and a half, so I spun a couple of records, just, put the headphones on so it wasn't loud, and just laid on the living room floor and just spun some, prog metal albums that I have. But it's like, it's tough for somebody who's just kind of, because the thing about this music is in a way it demands your attention. You know what I mean? Like,
because otherwise it'll pass you by.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
and you're like, what just happened? It's almost like a book, right? Like, I feel like that's what it is. Because like I'll be listening to like I was listening to Yes the other day in headphones, and I like drifted off for a minute, and it turned into like this like raucous like funky thing, and I was like, what? When did that happen? I love this. I was like, I wish I would have listened to the build up to this. It was probably pretty good, you know?
Yeah, those bands seemed like they would much rather, instead of have an album of 10 4-minute songs, they want 5 10-minute songs, because what they do in a 10-minute song is they're going to shift multiple times anyway. They're going to go through these 4 different moods or feelings or keys or timing, or they'll have the first 5 minutes will have trumpets, and then the next 5 minutes is guitar solo, and then it goes to drums for 2 minutes. So it's much more about the full view of the piece rather than here's a cool thing that was cool for 4 minutes. They find a way to bridge a thing for 4 minutes, bridge it between another thing with something else. Like,
I found that like just like kind of listening back, like I mean I didn't like dive like incredibly deep. I wanted to kind of like hit the surface of like I wanted to listen to Yes, and then I listened to Yes, and I listened to some Uriah Heep, which was more like on the metal-y side, like the Sabbathy side of prog, I feel. And then and then I kind of was sitting there and I was like, oh yeah, Floyd. And I put on Dark Side of the Moon, and it played for me so much better than the rest of them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like Floyd mastered the long form song, but also in that they were more like humanist as well. Like the vision of the concept of the piece was so striking and almost like evident, because I feel like that album hits with almost every person. That's why it's so popular.
Yeah.
And it hit on that level of like human being.
Well, and
that's, I feel like that's also like was like another thing. I was like, maybe that it's not as accessible to other people, because a lot of the time prog was like a fantasy escape, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons kind of trip.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because they were singing about like wizards and like mountains, like literally, like
it's kind of
like it's very Lord of the Rings inspired kind of deal, right? Like Tolkien kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would.
And then
I agree with that.
I found that like that's why like I was like, why is this one? And it's like it is just like, I mean, the rest of them. It's not. I mean, it's a whole movement. Like Dark Side of the Moon's a movement,
Yeah.
And then like I was like, I feel like that's why it hit different. You know what I mean? As the kids say.
Yeah, I mean that's my number one critique of prog rock, and why I can't get into loving all of it. I like a lot of it, and I do love some of it, but I don't love the concept of prog rock, because I think it is lacking in feeling, like heart. It's a lot of thinking.
Yes,
there's a lot of thought, but it's missing that emotional side for me, and I just don't connect to it. But yet Pink Floyd, these are guys who, their parents fought and died in World War II, and they're singing about being an abandoned generation in a time where technology is taking over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you could say the same thing. Radiohead did that in the 90s with OK Computer.
Right.
It's years later. I mean, I listened to Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, and I thought it reminded me so much of Dark Side of the Moon. It's 10 songs that go into each other, that all are talking about all aspects of society and culture, the world, our humanity, wars, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just like, oh yeah, these are white British dudes' version of how do I connect with as many people as possible with my music.
So let's talk to this now, right? Okay, so we got that. Would you say that Stevie Wonder's like Songs in the Key of Life, where that is like a giant, almost like all those Stevie Wonder albums are like kind of theme?
Yeah.
Especially what is that, Inner Visions? Like, come
Yeah.
on, Inner Visions is like the whole Too High, like Living for the City. You know what I mean? Like, I get that vibe.
I mean, yeah, Songs in the Key of Life, you could call that a soul prog rock album.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
I-
like 28 songs and it goes in every direction
And
possible.
I would say, like,
Yeah.
you making that Marvin Gaye point too. I'm like, man, that in it all, they all siege in, like, it's all movement. It goes into one song. It's a continuous on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. No, I dig that. I never thought of that. And I feel now that you're saying that might have some kind of like let's talk like white boy English version of that, and then let's talk like American, soul version of that.
Yeah.
Like, that's what that is to me. That's what I like. That's what I hear when I like hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting how they come from two pretty different kind of schools of music. But that you can kind of find that sort of bridging quality between like we said, like a Stevie Wonder album and a Pink Floyd album, or a Marvin Gaye album and a Pink
Yeah,
Floyd
man, that's
album,
dope. That's why I love music. That's
Yeah.
great.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's where my disconnect is, because it's musically, like, even with no lyrics, none of that content, musically it's so European sounding.
Yeah.
It's so taking from Bach and Wagner and Beethoven, and it's not from the American R&B tradition
Yeah.
of rock and roll
Right.
and soul and hip hop and everything that's coming in America, which is from a lot of artists who are people of color.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the prog rock world are not people of color. It's completely different musical heritage and musical background.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, one is very like classical, like Western approach,
Right.
very like mathematical kind of approach to music, and the other one is very much rooted in kind of like, like the African, like hard rhythmic quality kind of to it. Not that. Okay, yeah, you listen to like Wagner. Wagner's like real bass heavy, and there's a lot of bang booms
Right.
and stuff like that. But it's not in the way that you get from Africa, or say even maybe like India, because India has like really crazy complicated
Well,
rhythms
that
and stuff too. But
like,
that's
bringing
we're
that back too.
not
Like
relating
you
it to R&B,
just said
but-
that. Like, I also want to note like the Indian effect on like English musicians from the Beatles and around the world also
yeah.
led. I mean, that's like one of the biggest examples of how people got prog. Like the Stones started, and then everyone kind of had a Sitari song, and then it kind of, the experimentation of it as well.
Right.
Because I also wanted to talk too, like we were talking how classical music. You have any of you ever heard of the album Switched
Switched on Bach.
Yeah, Switched on Bach,
The
the Moog
Moog?
Bach album.
Yeah.
Like,
is
it was one
that
of the
the Wendy Carlos album?
I
where
don't-
It's the Moog synthesizer and it's like sampled on Clockwork Orange and all that.
Oh, I don't know if that's. I can see the cover though. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's
basically this dude like dressed as Bach.
Yeah, it's this like dude like dressed as Bach in front of like a giant Moog, like the first Moog that was ever invented.
Yeah.
That's one of the first. It's the first, if not the second Moog album that was ever released. I
think it's the first.
Yeah.
The first thing that was
Yeah.
recorded on Moog was Bach.
And I feel like that had an effect also. That like was the because like okay,
Well,
so-
because then you hear Rick Wakeman and it makes sense.
well, also like the Bach influence, like where did that come from, man? Like, you know what I mean? Like all these guys were like listening to obviously the Beatles were listening to Brian Wilson, but that album, tons of people bought that album, and then tons of people bought Moogs.
Yeah.
Like, and then all you started hearing on these albums was Moog synthesizer. It was everywhere.
Yeah, and it was that kind of that hard transition from if your band had an organ, it was like a Hammond sort
Right.
of B3 running through like a Leslie speaker, and then there was like a hard turn to more synthesizer heavy, more keyboard heavy,
Yeah.
rather than organ heavy.
And I think that might have have had some effect on people, because if that's the first time you listen to the instrument and it's Bach and you're in a rock band and you get a Moog, the first thing you're probably going to play on it is Bach type stuff if it's the only thing you've ever heard.
Yeah, especially because that instrument, when the Moog came out, it's where what you are programming had to be very contrapuntal and classical based. And I think because prog rock has such an obsession with adopting the new musical technology, the fact that the Moog was on the market was a huge tool for the prog rock guys to use because it took up a wall. It probably cost $100,000 at the time.
Yeah.
So it was like the big dick energy move.
Yeah.
Was to get this big wall that you have to plug wires in. And hopefully you can do it in the right order where it plays something that's like do 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 do, and but it can't bend notes. It can't or all those kind of oscillators. Those were interpolated like 3 years later.
Yeah.
By a lot of the jazz fusion guys, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Are all about the blues notes. So they had to figure out ways to make the note itself warble. But yeah, I mean that instrument, and think of all the new instruments that people adopt in prog rock, whether it's the Chapman stick, which is well, Tony Levin from King Crimson plays, it's like an 8-string bass, some stand-up, who knows, to like all the drum machines and like handheld drum machines and electronic wind instruments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they'd throw in curveballs like these like old English like folk mandolin style that, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, like I feel like that's like the Togany influence. Like that's Bob Dylan too, like right? So you got like the weird lyrics and folk music. I feel like they were taken everywhere. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Because I mean, you listen to a Yes album, right? And to like the other thing too, like Dark Side of the Moon, to like our point earlier of like soulful, it has like funky bass lines and
Right.
funk, right? Same with Yes, and Yes was super popular and super accessible, and it was a huge band.
Yeah.
Right? Chris Squire, that like Roundabout, that's a funky bass line.
Right.
Yeah, it's just like so. Even like long, what is that song? Long Distance Run Around. Like
Oh, yeah.
No.
Do-do-do-do-do.
Yeah, it's just so, it's more melodic and more funky.
Yeah.
So I feel like that too, like to what we were saying, I feel like the most popular ones of the genre were the ones that were rooted still heavy in like R&B
blues.
R&B and blues music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit this past week thinking about prog rock bands and stuff, and how I discovered Gentle Giant, which is like a band that I never really got into, and I'm just like, well, they're in the when you look up a list, right?
Yeah.
They're in there somewhere. So I'm like, all right, let me try it out, and not for me.
Why? Let's talk about why.
Because I listened to it,
I feel
and
like
to me, it's just like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's the vibe that I was feeling when I listened to it. Because I'm like, it just seems, I don't know, it seems self-indulgent almost.
Yeah, I mean,
and I dig it. I'm like right on, because let's be real here, I can't play that stuff.
Can I tell you?
You know what I mean? But it's also like, when I'm hanging out with friends and I want to create like a nice atmosphere for the evening or whatever, I'm not going to put on Gentle Giant, man. You know what I mean?
depends what kind of friends you're hanging out with.
Yeah, I guess, I suppose so. But it was just, I don't know. It just wasn't really vibing with me. I don't know. It was too hectic.
That band, just my input on that band, I listened to them because they were on a list. Nothing about them stuck with me. I have no memory of listening to them, but I know I listened to like 2 of their albums.
Yeah.
And that's not a diss against the band. It's just, again, like, it just didn't really connect with me.
Yeah.
I feel like what Mike's saying too, where it's like, I feel like the just because you should, thing.
Yeah.
Or just because you can doesn't mean you should. I get that like a lot too from like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I know that they were super accessible too, but like.
Yeah, they never really resonated
They
with me
rubbed
either.
me the wrong way every time, and I don't know why. You know what I mean? Like that one,
Which
and
is
they
weird.
never stick with me either. Like I hear it, and I'm like, oh,
You're
it's
like-
so tough for me.
It's one of those, if an Emerson, Lake and Palmer song comes on the radio, you're kind of sitting there like, who the hell is this? And then and they're like, that was Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And you're like, oh, yeah.
You're like, of course it was.
I mean, to me, they're like the power trio version of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Like, I just never want to put it on.
Yeah.
I could have it on, and I wouldn't run across the room to turn it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nothing. I never seek out ELP. Great players.
Yeah.
I mean, and we got to talk about Greg Lake as the lead singer and bass player on the first King Crimson album, which, in my opinion, probably the best prog rock album of all time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll agree
And
with
if
that.
not the best, it was the best first one.
Right,
Or,
right,
you know,
right. The most like
69.
earth-shaking, like, yeah, because that was early. That was 69, and like when you think about like the prog rock era, you're thinking like, early-ish to mid
70s.
into late 70s. Yeah, you think of 70s as being the prog rock, where 60s is more psych.
Okay, so like we talked about like maybe what we don't like. So we're talking King Crimson, which we all at this table listen to the album. We all
We can
enjoy
agree
it.
on that one, yeah.
Why do we like it compared to the others in the genre? Like what's up with that? Like why like this genre for us is tough because like some stuff we're like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It's not something we want to listen to every day, but we really enjoy it at its core.
I
To
mean,
other stuff where we're just like, it's rather forgettable for us. Like, so what do you think the difference is with that, like, King Crimson album?
for me, that album is my favorite King Crimson album because I like Greg Lake's voice more than the other vocalists afterward in King Crimson. I love the saxophone. I think that guy's name is Ian something McKay or Ian. I don't know. Sorry. No
Ian McKay.
No disrespect.
Lead singer from Minor Threat
Yeah, I know.
and Fugazi.
I know. But it's something like that.
Mel Collins.
It's something like that.
Mel.
It's definitely Ian something.
Listen, I'm trying to do research while Jeff is talking, and there's a separate Wikipedia page for the list of King Crimson members.
Characters. I like how you put that.
Yeah, I mean, they might as well be characters.
Well, and so the saxophone. So the Reeds player played saxophone, which was much like the Dark Side of the Moon soulful sax. A lot of times he played the flute. They had the keyboard player played a lot of mellotron, which is a tape instrument that samples orchestras.
Robert Fripp, who's the mellotron guy.
Oh, I'm a big fan of the Mellotron as well.
I love the mellotron.
Yeah, I mean, I love the sound of that. The kind of it's like sampled orchestras.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful, unique sound. But that's what that album is. Just it's more like the psychedelic rock than it is like the sci-fi opuses. Even though that album, the first King Crimson album, at least some of those tracks are very long, orchestrally based kind of experiments, but because of the sonic qualities of that album, I love that album. It's so warm. It's before things kind of got thinned out, in my opinion, in the 70s, in the mixing and the dryness of things and how things were jacked up with the treble. Because people were doing a lot of cocaine during that era, and you got to keep the highs high, and so that's why all the mids are taken out of the stuff in the 70s. But that King Crimson, like the mellotron, that you can hear the warmth in like the cello samples, which in the mid 70s that stuff sounds so airy and so like vacant.
Yeah.
I know. I think his that's like a valid point, especially the bass point too, because like I feel like the difference is. You know, forgive the drug connotations, but weed versus like the cocaine later, right?
Yeah.
Like it's you know that
weed
that
and
does
psychedelics versus
it
more
is.
like high energy stimulants.
Yeah, no, because that's like that's something to like, kind of it's taboo to like say, I guess, whatever. But like if we're being honest and talking about music, like. All these people were doing drugs like in heavy amounts.
Oh
like,
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Well documented.
You can't. That's what you can't get away from that one.
Yeah. So I mean, like, and that's an interesting thing too on like the writing production side too, which is like maybe like more sitting down, more bassy, more like maybe even more soulful a little bit. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think that album plays so well too, just because like, all right, 21st Century Schizoid Man. First of all, killer opening song to an album,
and like let's
for
talk
a debut album on top of it. You're like, it immediately grasps you. It's like from the jump. It's like what is happening, and it's clocking in at 7 minutes and 24 seconds long, but it plays like a single.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You hear it, and it
I
plays
feel
very
like
much like a single.
You are excited to hear what's next the entire time, even when you've listened to it a million times.
Yeah, it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Yeah, because even
that
like
saxophone,
the freeform kind of jam part of the song, it doesn't. Yeah, like it still has a little bit of that soulfulness to it. So it feels real different, even though it's still very much like they're doing these crazy rhythmic things, but it never feels like flat.
Right.
Like it's exciting,
Ian McDonald, by the way.
Oh, okay.
My apologies.
Oh, you were so close.
I knew it's Ian M. something.
Yeah.
Also,
McDonald.
too, like let's talk about like how the rest of the album doesn't sound like that first song.
Yeah.
Which is like the whole. That's
But
another thing.
But in that way, in other words, I've listened to albums, man. Like there's a band called Marmalade. They have one tune. I think it's called I've Been Around Too Long. That song rips. It's like that awesome killer, like late 60s, early 70s, like hard hitting, like rock kind of blues songs. And then the rest of the album is all just like, what?
Bread. It's like bread, right?
Yeah. You're like, what? But that's the thing with this album is like it completely changes, but
And
you're
it's
not
good.
Yeah, you're not unhappy about it. You're like, oh, this is really cool. This is that they can achieve kind of this really, really edgy first song, and then in the Corner of the Crimson King, that song itself is very much like it's like Renaissance-esque.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like it's got that vibe to it.
No, yeah, I dig it. Also, Schizoid Man to me, when I first heard it, because I had heard the Stooges Funhouse before, that's what I instantly thought of when that saxophone came ripping in. I was like,
Oh, yeah.
I was like, that's where they got that from. Like, yeah, they were definitely listening to that record.
Yeah. Also been famously sampled by
Oh, Kanye West.
Kanye West. Yay.
Jesus
himself,
Yeah.
our Lord Jesus.
I mean, yeah, to jump ahead or to touch on that, if you listen to Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, there's like a Mike Oldfield sample, who's the dude who wrote Tubular Bells, which is like a 25-minute, he plays every instrument on it, prog rock masterpiece. But yeah, so prog rock still connects today.
Yeah.
Even in hip hop music, you need some thumping drums and someone to scream something.
Yeah.
And to make some screeching type of guitar thing, it's a perfect thing to sample.
Yeah.
I wonder if anyone's sampled like Roundabout. Like, you know,
I don't
it makes
know.
me think.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not sure.
So now we're talking like Schizoid Man too. Like, talk to like the heavier side of prog. Like, all right, so you had bands like Uriah Heep, you know.
That brought it a little, maybe like a little darker.
Yeah. Also, though, Uriah Heep was writing like you know, very fantasy heavy songs, but also it was more like Black Sabbath-y with like the layered vocal of Yes at times, with like Mellotron-y, you know, keyboardy. But all the songs were like under 5 minutes on like what was this one I spun the other
Is it
day?
Angels and Wizards or whatever?
I think it's called Wizards and Demons.
Wizards.
Sir.
Yeah, that's what it is. Wizards and Demons.
And I found that to be way more, you know, like something
Yeah.
that would be accessible to a Black Sabbath fan.
yeah, right there.
Right, yeah. Uriah Heep, Demons, and Wizards. Also, shout out, I think we'll maybe talk about this like later, but the artwork of Roger Dean highly influencing the genre.
Oh yeah.
Because like every major prog band had a Roger Dean cover. Uriah Heep, yes. Green Slade I have in here.
Badger.
Yep, Badger.
Is he the dude who did the Asia album?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
He's kind of like the original Alex Gray.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
well,
like-
the
Except
art
he's
the art is very reminiscent of Conan the Barbarian, whoever that
Oh, yeah,
artist, the
yeah.
mythological, you know, the Slayers and all.
yeah, like the fantasy
Yeah.
world, like worldscapes and
Very-
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like it you know, nerd culture is really popular now. And like let's talk to like how Rush is popular now. Like, you know, like Rush was like the crap on band for years. Like I was one of them, guys. Let's
Yeah.
you know.
I was one of them too.
yeah,
I'll say
you know,
that.
like, you know, Rush sucks. But like Rush is pretty popular now, as is much, you know, of nerd culture.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is born kind of, I mean, at least in like the rock and roll sense of it, is kind of born out of these like Roger Dean covers and fantasy and
Yeah.
the prog genre. Really, I mean, it was something for kids to get nerdy about.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of the it's obviously okay. Rush isn't American, but it's the across the pond kind of take on the prog rock that was happening in the U.S. You know what I mean? So you
Yeah.
listen to like Rush, like Hemispheres, or obviously, I mean 2112's like the album. Moving Pictures, yeah, whatever. But I like older Rush, but so yeah, it's kind of the Canadian
But-
American take on
Yeah.
on prog, which kind of changed things a little bit again. You know, it kind of shifted a little
Yeah.
bit because I mean, the first Rush album is not a prog rock album.
No,
The first Rush album plays like a Led Zeppelin album.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like it just plays like a Zeppelin album. And Fly By Night comes out, and you get a little bit more because the original drummer leaves, Neil Peart comes in, things get a little proggier. Then you have, I think, Caress of Steel, and then you get that kind of run of records that is like Hemispheres, 2112. There's a couple other ones, but I think Hemispheres
Well,
is the one.
and
that
I think
stand out
Rush
for me.
is having a particular moment in the past months or year. I forget when Neil Peart actually passed away, but
Yeah.
when he passed away, a bunch of 15-year-olds across the country and across the world heard their 45-year-old dads bemoan the fact that he had passed away.
Yeah.
And they're probably thinking, who's this guy that is talked about as the greatest drummer possibly of all time in rock music? So it's like, it's like when Elvis died. And I'm sure a ton of 15-year-olds who weren't actually into Elvis at the time looked up Elvis and got into Elvis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Like I went back and started listening to Rush again because there's going to be no more Rush.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen anymore. So you have to honor it by going back and listening to those albums. And I'm sure tons of 15-year-olds are listening to those albums because it's like if John Bonham died. It's like when Jimi Hendrix died. It's like when any great in a genre dies, it reverberates beyond the people who listen to them, and it makes people listen to them.
Yeah. It was like that when BB King died. BB King died maybe 4 years ago or something.
That was a hard hit.
Yeah, BB King was a hard one, but similarly, and it's just with the age of information that we have as well. You know what I mean? If a musician or something like that dies, like Neil Peart, the chances are inevitably on like some sort of whatever social media feed that you're on, it's going to pop up eventually because it's kind of big news, and somebody at least knows somebody who's really into music. So, you know what I mean? You kind of have that sort of thing kind of putting the gasoline on like spreading the word.
Yeah, and I was like a Rush hater. Mike was like the one that was like, "Hey man, like you gotta listen to Rush. It's so good. You'll like it." And then I listened to it, and of course I liked it. And then like talking to my dad, even like when Neil Peart died, my dad was so upset.
Yeah,
he was like, "Oh man," he's like, "I've been blasting Rush for days. Like all my Rush records are my dad's. Like he was like a Rush guy. Like that was his thing, And like he's like he's the best drummer, And even to like my dad didn't like much other prog. I don't think he's not into he's not into like all that other stuff.
I think the quality that Rush has is they are. I think because of the first Rush album, they had this kind of thing about them that was kind of like the working man's prog rock band.
Well, weren't they the working men?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, right? And then kind of I think the single was first played in like Pittsburgh, like a
Cleveland, man. Cleveland.
That's what it was. Cleveland.
Rock and roll.
That's what it was. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say though is that there's that kind of a connection.
It's working class.
Yeah, it's like exactly. Even though let's be real, big picture, Rush did some pretty sophisticated stuff.
Absolutely. But I feel like
the approach was maybe a little bit easier.
I dig that because I hear what you're trying to say. I feel like what you were saying, not trying to say, but like what you're saying is like Rush were giving off more of like a everyday guy vibe where we were just like noting that like Emerson, Lake and Palmer were like emitting like not everyday guy vibes.
Oh yeah, and very much like I went to the Music Conservatory of London and blah 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 blah.
Right.
Tweed jackets. And
Yeah,
that
like
kind
that.
Of shit.
I feel
you know
like
what I mean? Where like Rush was just kind of like they were still doing that kind of a thing.
Even like Floyd, like talking about like more human-y things. You know what I mean? And that's what maybe made them more relatable, more human. And where like that's where maybe I feel like we're really just pointing out like the successes in the genre and like what we think is like what we like as like accessible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, I don't know what makes Emerson, Lake and Palmer more accessible to somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to, like, say it's, like, bad music. It's just not for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's okay, too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's okay, too. But
and I feel like that's an interesting thing because that might, like, like, you hear these, like, music journalists speak, but, like, we are all, we are working people. We're, like, everyday guys. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the different viewpoint. Like we are the consumer, like as much as the commentator. Where like those guys are like the industry. That's a different vibe for me. Even if you're like putting it up on like Pitchfork or whatever, if you're working for them, like that's the same deal. You're still in the industry, so you think to some extent that you are an influencer. Where we are looking at it, where we have no stake in the game at all. And I feel like that's why the bands that we are pointing out as more that we like more is maybe the more working class vibe. I don't know. That's just kind of like the thoughts that I kind of, when I listened to that Pink Floyd record, that feeling hit me so instantly. Yeah. So. Yeah.
And well, I mean, I had heard a thing. I think, did Keith Emerson, he recently died, but I think not recently died, but, 2016. But there was something, this dude wrote this book, and I was watching like an interview with this guy who wrote this book that was like this deep dive on prog rock, whatever. But what he was basically saying was that like that Keith Emerson, after Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and after the dust cleared and like nobody's listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer anymore, kind of thing. That
Right.
Keith Emerson was insanely frustrated because he was like trying to write like these huge, like artistic masterpieces that nobody would hear because nobody was interested in listening to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And and
The taste had changed.
yeah, but yeah, and that's what, and I think
And
to
that's
play
why he became a ghostwriter for Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
yeah.
I can only assume, or wrote film scores, or something.
Yeah, he did something. I don't really. I didn't do a too deep of a dive.
If we're talking
but
Emerson too, man, like his first band, The Nice, I enjoy so much.
I like the Nice.
I do not know them.
Like their first album. I mean, I love their first album. That's where I'm really at with them.
Oh.
It's psychedelic in like the Pink Floyd-y first album kind of way, a little bit, and it's English, and I dig the psychedelic-y side more of that band, where it was like keyboard heavy, fun. I don't know.
To speak to Emerson real quick, he committed suicide.
Oh, bummer, guys.
But he was
Yeah.
in his late 60s or something.
I think so. Yeah, he was.
Still a tragedy, but different circumstances.
Yeah, different circumstances. But from what I had heard, it was because of the fact that he was a really frustrated musician who was, like I said, writing music that nobody would listen to, and
Sending letter after letter to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
yeah,
petitioning his case for ELP to be inducted.
Prog's never getting in. Like, I mean,
I
Rush
think
were
Rush
lucky.
got in.
Yes got in.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, because Geddy Lee sat
after
in.
Rush got in, like
King Crimson? I would assume that
I don't
they're
think
in.
so.
No. A 55-year career and no respect.
like I don't think Zappa is either.
I don't know.
Like,
I'm not sure.
You know what? Like this conversation has also made me like think is like more that I enjoy prog, like in like prog mixed. Like Rush is like not exclusively like the prog bit. I
It's not
like
pure.
yeah, like I like my prog watered down with something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, if we mention, so we talked about King Crimson's the first album. We talked about a little bit. We talked about Rush. Like, who are the prog rock bands? Like, what's the Mount Rushmore? What's the top 5? What's the
okay.
Who are the archetypes, the giants in the genre?
I would
you have to have yes.
Yeah, I'd say yes. I'd also say King Crimson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as much as we hate to admit it, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yep.
I don't want them on the list, but I think they have to be on the list.
I disagree completely.
I disagree, yeah.
I think there's like way better examples
think
because then
they're
you have
important.
Floyd, right? So Floyd
Yeah.
would be 3. I feel like we all agree on. Like what now I'm kind of, and I would say Rush for accessibility to bring people back into the genre in a new era, like, especially like in the 80s.
Right.
Because they were still kind of like shouting all those vibes the whole time.
Yeah.
Right? So I would definitely put Rush on the list, but like what would you put as the 5th? Would you put Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or would you put like I don't know,
No,
like
I have one.
Genesis.
yeah, let's hear it. Oh,
I feel-
Genesis. I mean,
Genesis. They were.
So let's kick off Emerson, Lake and Palmer and put Genesis in just for the
Yeah.
for the grandness of it.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we're
Yeah.
talking that too, so we're talking 5. Who was yours? Who was your other one?
I mean, mine. I feel very strongly, and I've been listening to them this past week, and people forget, but especially their first 5 albums, Queen is absolutely a prog rock
Oh.
band, except that they got onto the radio and they cracked the format and they forced radio to accept what they were doing.
I
Yeah,
enjoy that.
okay.
I enjoy that curveball.
I wasn't even my brain wasn't even there. That's how accessible it is, though. It
Right.
because at some point I feel like the word prog rock is a dirty word to all of us that like at least punk or that style of music,
Yeah.
right? Or like not punk, but you know what I'm saying. Like,
No, I feel what you're saying. Yeah, I think that in musical circles, when you say prog rock, your mind immediately goes to a very specific place.
Yeah, it's like a white gloves type of atmosphere.
Yeah.
yeah,
it's
like
not down and dirty.
Well, yeah, it's like
Right.
it's like Velvet Underground good, prog bad, but they're both like I would almost say equally as hard to listen to at times.
Yeah,
Yeah. True.
Okay, so like that's what I'm talking about.
yeah. But I mean, Queen totally though, if you think about it, because in a very sort of Western approach approach to music way that like yes like we talked about incorporating like Bach and stuff like that. I mean, Queen did the same thing, but instead of instead of being influenced by say Bach, they were more influenced by like a Mozart opera.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it was instead of being like a night at the Fillmore, it was a night at the opera.
No, I dig
but it was
that.
still very much rooted in that sort of classical approach to music, but just with the flair and the Broadway kind of thing, like that kind of, it's showbiz, baby, like it's that kind of thing.
Also, like Keep Yourself Alive, man. Like the first song in the first album. Oh my god! I mean, that whole album is like it's
love that
like
first
Rush
album.
proggy, and it's way before Rush too. Like
I
got
mean,
74.
They have in their first handful of albums, and they have songs about ogres and fairies and mad queens and prophets and time travel and space, and it just goes all over those kind of nerd culture territories that prog rock dwells in. And for me, it's like prog rock essential elements are things like an operatic or classical music background of some kind, virtuosic guitar generally. I besides ELP, I can't think of any other prog rock band that does not have virtuosic guitar in it.
Yeah, it's a given.
Right.
And things like a counterpuntal bass. If you think of John Deacon, it's very much how the bass is written and played in classical music, especially against the vocals. It has that Liberace type of piano playing.
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sakes, their 8th or 9th album, they did the score for like the
Flash Gordon
album, movie, and that whole thing is just sci-fi prog synthesizer craziness.
Yeah.
And so they have pop hits and they have the stomp stomp clap stuff.
Yeah.
But they also have songs about dragon attacks and like
I'd say
I love that you brought that up because
Yeah,
like my mind
absolutely.
didn't even go there, and
Yeah.
that's oh man, that's great, man.
Yeah.
But
they
that's
just
what's
keep
awesome.
their songs to 5 minutes or less generally. So that's kind of why
That's why I
Right.
didn't. That's why my brain never goes there with them. But then I do put it on, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
Because like especially the first album, I remember when I first put that on, I was like, oh my god, I was like, this is like Rush. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So after I'd say maybe after the 70s, maybe we see a bit of a lull in prog rock. Would you say maybe not in the way that I think maybe in mainstream music.
Okay.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I
You
wanted
know.
to talk to you because, like you said, you listen to a lot of Genesis, and this is what I
Oh,
noticed.
please, yeah.
This is what I noticed with all the bands, and this is Genesis as well. We can kind of form that up into the '80s. I feel they went pop. All the bands went pop.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to throw out too, like if we're talking all the bands went pop, Todd Rundgren even like coming into the '80s when Utopia turned into a pop band.
Yeah.
And Utopia was like a prog all day.
Yeah.
So tell me what you felt about Genesis, and then maybe we could talk about Genesis in the '80s because that's what I'm more familiar with even.
See, where I'm not really I'm the Genesis that I tried to digest was earlier stuff. I mean, I think Foxtrot, Phil Collins is on Foxtrot, but that was still pretty early, and that's something I didn't realize either is that Phil Collins came on pretty early on. I thought he was much more '80s.
No, yeah, I think he joined the band on their 2nd or 3rd album. or
Yeah.
something.
And I think it was. I think it is. It goes Nursery Crime and then Foxtrot. And I think Nursery Crime is the 2nd or 3rd album, and then Foxtrot's the 3rd or 4th, and he comes on for Foxtrot. I don't think he's on Nursery Crime. So that was my experience with that, and it's not. Yeah, I mean, I think the same thing. I kind of like what Jeff said with what band was it? Where you're like, yeah, I'm sure I listened to it. I know I listened to a couple albums. Yeah, Gentle Giant. Thank you. So, I mean, okay, I listened to Genesis 3 days. I listened to these albums 3 days ago, and I kind of don't really remember them because it's just for me, I didn't. Okay, I'm like, cool. This is cool. This is fun prog rock, whatever, and what's his name is always fun.
Peter Gabriel.
Thank you. Yeah,
Oh,
Peter
yeah, of
Gabriel. He's
course.
always fun. But yeah, I think similarly how it's interesting to see your Led Zeppelins and your Deep Purples and all those kinds of harder hitting bands and your Claptons and seeing what they did in the 80s.
Right.
And then seeing Yes and Genesis, who were, similarly from a kind of, they're the Brits, whatever.
Similar schools, similar times, similar
Yeah.
bands at some point.
Yeah, to see how Yes and Genesis kind of adapted to the new sound of the 80s, and I'll just say I do not like any of them.
Even like Asia, right? Because that was formed out of, I don't know who's in Asia, guys.
Yeah,
I'm
if
sorry.
Asia was
That's
formed
it.
out of
I
like
stay
the
away.
yeah, it was formed out of Yes. I think Steve Howe, the guitar
I think so,
player,
yeah.
formed Asia, and I think I don't know, I don't think Rick Wakeman was on it, but I think Ian, whatever his name was, the lead singer of Yes. I don't know if he sang for Asia, but yeah, it's from the show. It's from the show.
The prog rock version of Damn Yankees.
Yeah,
Right.
It's like,
I love good. That was a good one.
yeah.
but yeah, they went full pop, and it's weird because Genesis is very artsy, avant-garde, kind of hard to digest on
Right,
those
right.
first 5 albums. And Peter Gabriel leaves. He continues to make prog pop music.
Yep.
Very experimental. And his band kind of turns into like radio friendly prog rock, dad rock, yacht rock. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
And that's the stuff I've listened to, the Peter Gabriel stuff, and I don't connect with it. I try, but you can throw on Invisible Touch. I like that. Late 80s Genesis, but it's not prog rock at all. It might as well be 2 different bands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and because that's more Phil Collins driven
And then
stuff.
that
and
Yes-
I love Phil Collins. I'm not,
That Yes record that went huge with
Owner of a Lonely Heart.
yeah, that record is huge.
Yeah.
And that's 83, and that's a pop record all day long. But it also has the prog changes, like the
Right.
yeah, they throw some flavor in there, but it's in comparison to the Yes album, you're like, whoa,
very
how do we get here? But
Yeah.
it makes sense though. It's the 80s, man. Everything's switching to synth, gated reverbs
And what was the new blood in the 80s in the prog rock scene? Because I can only think in prog rock in the 80s were all the bands in the 70s, but now they're just 40, 45 years old.
right. Yeah, I think
Because King Crimson and Rush, they had some of their best albums in the 80s.
the only 80s band I can think. So I think what ended up happening was that the original prog rock bands went pop, and the new progressive guitar driven music made the jump to heavy metal.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah,
And I think that's where
that was
it
my
did.
next
It just
point. I was gonna say
like
that.
the rail car was just redirected, and then you had like a standout, like for me anyway growing up, is Queensryche. Queensryche did they had an album called Operation Mindcrime that was very proggy in the way that it was like this this concept album where every song ran into the next one. There were a lot of these sort of like social, political kind of big picture topics that they were talking about, and they were able to pull that off. And even, earlier albums like the self-titled album, that's pretty proggish, but it's still very much like 80s, But even Jeff Tate, the lead singer, classically trained like theater vocalist, who his range was crazy. He could hit these crazy highs, but he could also like get all the way down here, So it's a far.
I think,
I
like,
love Queensryche.
to what Jeff was saying too, right? So those guys were in their 40s, right, in the 80s. So wouldn't that generation of kids that were like into their own music, which would have been like heavy metal, which was the popular young people's music, I guess, if you were that kind of person,
Yeah.
right? You would have looked at your father's record collection because you were young, and that probably would have been that time, right? So in that, your parent, like when you were starting to maybe pick up your parents' music, when you didn't think it all sucked, when you know what I mean, like there was everyone kind of has that time where you're like, oh yeah, the Beatles. So
Yeah.
maybe that's also maybe what was kind of going on
And
too.
if you listen to any of like the 80s hit, right, we have like the birth of like thrash metal and then like 80s hair metal, it starts getting a little bit heavier with like Van Halen in the late 70s, Kiss, whatever, and then it forms into, you have your Poisons and so on. But that's what you can listen to any interview of any member of any 80s hair metal band, and the majority of them have that same story where it's like, yeah, when I was little, I was just picking through my dad's like Zeppelin albums, and then I listened to like some Deep Purple, and then I picked up a guitar, and then I saw Kiss, and then I
Right.
heard Black Sabbath, and then boom, 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 you have
Hair metal.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
Quiet Riot. You know what I mean? You have you have all these you have all these bands, and then obviously it gets heavier. But yeah, that's, I think, and maybe the metal guys who went on to do more progressive metal things, say like Queensrÿche or whatever.
Maybe their fathers were dorks.
Their dads were like, you know what I mean? Where Nikki Sixx's dad was listening to Zeppelin, Chris Squire's dad. I mean, I'm sorry, whatever, Queensrÿche, Jeff Tate's dad was listening to, Genesis or like Yes, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
no, I
where are they growing? Where are they growing out of, kind of thing?
No, that's definitely the point, I feel.
And yeah, it's prog rock since the late 80s hasn't existed really. It's been adopted under the metal umbrella. Because you think
definitely.
Any band you could call prog rock generally in the last 25 years, most people would just call it metal band.
Yeah. Like a prog metal band, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't even know if you would put the prog in front of it, because I feel like what we are maybe the point, or like we weren't really trying to prove, but kind of came out of this, was maybe that prog isn't like a great name for this genre, when, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it might have the more negative connotations of it.
Yeah.
From that had grown out of the punk movement. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In response to that style of music
Sure.
that had grown dominant in the landscape.
Oh yeah, because 40 years ago, culture decided punk was cool and prog rock was nerdy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
That's kind of what.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely a lull. Progressive rock turns to progressive metal, and then I think if we're maybe trying to bring it up to more modern times, you have standout bands like Tool.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Tool's one of those bands that's like more modern and definitely progressive in their own way. Maybe I think that Tool, even though they don't sound like Pink Floyd, are progressive music, the same approach as Pink Floyd. Rather than, because Tool's not, I mean, okay, they had a couple, I went and listened to the back catalog and stuff, and they have some faster tunes, but like, let's be real, they're a very atmospheric band. They create kind of like this hazy space, you know what I mean? Where it's like,
where
it's,
they dwell.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's a good example of like a modern prog band that maybe is metal in the way that it's heavily distorted guitars and stuff, but not in the way that that's, say, like a Yes or like a Yes influenced band.
Right. You know what I was just kind of thinking too? You're like talking modern. Would you say now it's like interesting because like we kind of got to watch hip hop evolve and form through our childhoods, and really see the genre take different shapes and styles and colors. Would you say now maybe that hip hop is getting in its prog phase, where like Kanye has like taken out like maybe the whole beat, right? Or like it's so getting abstract now, where you could have like just like like the song is 30 seconds long, and that is like where it's experimenting, where it's like the beat might be like so dismantled, or so, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah,
or at the very least, instead of sampling like 70s kind of funk records, they're like, especially somebody like Kanye West is pulling from all kinds of weird places, and I think it started, I mean, okay, Luke has this box set of this school jazz band that from I forget what year it was, but we were listening to this album, and remember it goes into a part, and I'm like, this is a Wu-Tang beat.
Oh no. This is it's called the Bodie box. This is Bodie was a recording studio, I think, in Cleveland, and they recorded a lot of soul music. And none of it was ever famous, but what the heck is that record company that I can't think of the name of? Anyway, look it up. It's called the Bodie Box. And it was an old soul sample, but yeah, you noticed that was what that was, right? That was a Wu-Tang sample in there.
Yeah. So that's,
but we're talking about like, obscure, and then making it even like, to, you know what I mean? The experimentation is, I feel like, formed out of that. Because I feel like rock music really stopped experimenting and almost started just pulling from its influence. You know what I mean? Because we talked of like, we talked of Brian Wilson, and then the Beatles, and then you could see the progression and how they were different. They pulled from everything they had now. Where like rock music, is quote unquote, as we would call it now, stagnant. Because and not, in the main front because maybe it has not evolved into like a thing that's highly accessible to everybody. Whereas like hip hop now is getting shot out of this genre, that genre, this offshoot, that offshoot. Like you have hip hop fans that are like, I like trap music, I don't like this. I like gangster rap, I don't like trap. I only listen to gangster rap. It's more of like genreified now, whereas rock was getting, you know what I mean? Because at one point in time you only had rock and roll. Right? And at one point in time, you only had rap, but then you had gangster rap, and then you had the West Coast,
rap,
East Coast conscious rap, flower.
It's kind of like how metal, like when you ever look at like the history of heavy metal charts and the different like, oh, this is symphonic Norwegian whatever metal, and this is this, that, and this. You know what I mean? But that's I think that's a natural thing for like to happen musically anyway. Like in other words, we don't really lump things together in that kind of okay, well, this is the Renaissance period, this is the Baroque period, this is the classical period, this is the Romantic period, this is the like we don't really categorize it like that anymore, as much as now we just categorize specific artists under specific nuanced versions of the same thing.
Right. And to my point now is I feel like we should stop genreizing music because it's useless. It's annoying. I feel like you could be like this. It sounds a little bit like Yes and Rush. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's more helpful to me.
Yeah, true.
Because I feel like genrefying music, it puts, it's the whole, it's the kind of like it puts it in a box to where somebody like myself had to literally like push through because I am such a fan of music that I was wondering why I did not enjoy why can't I like that? It's not cool. Well, who says that?
Right, right.
And that is, I feel like why Prog, I feel like has that, thing where it's like, it's lame, right? And so I feel like that is not helpful because we just named like Queen is an awesome band that everybody likes. Pink Floyd, awesome band that everybody likes.
Yeah.
Yes, you could like Yes if you tried. You know what I mean? It's not for everybody, but like it's accessible. Like King Crimson, a ton of people like King Crimson. It's accessible, and that is why I feel like why we shouldn't really like we should kind of maybe like move away from that. And I feel like we might be a little bit now, but
yeah. I mean, and to go back to hip hop, like the banner's still being carried by artists in hip hop, even though it seems as far away from the prog rock of the 70s. But you have artists like, in the 90s and 2000s, you got Jay Dilla, who's just making full albums out of samples from every type of music. You have someone today like Travis Scott, who releases a huge single, and it's like a 4-part song suite that goes in all these different directions. You got people like Drake, you have people like Denzel Curry, who are smashing up genres and like really, maybe the things are still in 4/4, but as far as sonically what's going on, it's very much closer to progressive rock than the boom bap rap music of Run DMC, which is just where a lot of rap artists take their sound from, or the genesis of their sound. But today everything's being pushed in extreme directions. And even the stuff that I don't really like, the mumblecore rap, that's very progressive in how they sample from everywhere.
Yeah.
And like I might not like the lyrical content or whatever, but the music that's going on behind it is so much more like the Moog synthesizer and the Mellotron and that stuff from the early 70s.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is when you're cutting up tracks and you're learning how to sample. Like Danger Mouse does a whole Jay-Z album with the Beatles' White Album as all the samples chopped and screwed and picked apart. And it's very much like 20th century classical music. It's fully repurposing.
And it's like we were just, I was just kind of saying, it is genre cutting because it can have that and that, and it's the same thing. That's the same music. You sampled it. It's that music.
Yeah.
It's just added. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's, and I feel like that's maybe like the way we should be going and looking at it. And, and I feel like the rap right now definitely has the is experimenting and pushing the boundaries of music forward, and that's why I appreciate the genre, even if I don't listen to it as much. Because I'm sorry guys, there's a ton of crappy shitty bands out there who are copies of other bands. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't
mean-
want to listen to your Otis Redding ripoff. I don't want to listen to your Led Zeppelin ripoff. I don't want to listen to your Sabbath ripoff.
Yeah.
Like,
Because that's really what they all are now. Like, let's face it, man.
yeah,
It's just
and,
like...
and I feel like hip hop has originality. It's got soul. It's got all that awesome stuff. It's got the pushing the boundaries of what music is.
Well, and that's
when
the whole-
rap came out, people didn't even think that was music.
Yeah.
And they made a whole new genre, and it's still like expanding and moving. And that's what, that's where I'm coming from. Where like this is.
Yeah, I mean, what's the definition of progressive other than to
Thank-
push things forward?
Yeah, to push things forward and move. And I feel like that's when people say rock got stagnant. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of people fell off of rock, because it is still moving at some point. There's an underground, but like,
Yeah.
it's not as,
It's not the driving force behind like rock.
It's not
It's not the driving force behind the musical growth that's happening like societally in the way that
Exactly.
hip hop music is. Because
Exactly.
and hip hop, I think the advantage that say the DJ or the producer has is the fact that okay, you see a lot of guys. Okay, like Anderson .Paak right now, like he'll play with a live band, which is a whole other thing too. Kind of that goes maybe say that challenges. What the what the ensemble setup is supposed to be for like a rap group. It's classically it is a DJ spinning records
Right.
with the performer or the group of people in front of them, and it like to incorporate a band to have like a hip hop band at one point was very much frowned upon, but then the move to start incorporating musicians. That I think that's kind of a progressive step, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, man, I
you know what I
dig it.
mean. But even now, as the producer, again, the advantage is that the whole real format of constructing a beat is to using samples. At that point, your palette becomes endless. If you're in a prog rock band, all you can kind of play is prog rock,
Right.
Or you know what I mean. And that's not to say that can't explore different avenues or whatever, but. Kanye. I know I keep referencing Kanye West, but like, what's that album? The first album you showed me when I was like not really. It's like a picture of like the disc, the CD or whatever.
Yeezus.
Yeah, Yeezus. Thank you. Where it's like these like crazy that
Oh, I
there's
dig
one
that- I
song
dig
where
that
it's like
record.
there's one like there's like these cascading like Native American like drum screeches and stuff kind of like played in and out of sequence or whatever, and it's like. That's what I think makes rap and hip hop so unique is that because that he can pull from wherever he wants, he's not really trapped in a bubble.
Right.
I mean, okay, yeah, I think the delivery of the lyric is the thing that keeps it hip hop, but I think every other aspect of it is very much like, whoa. Like
Well, and
out,
especially today because you have access to everything.
Right.
In
In
the 80s, you got to be a crate digger. You got to find those sounds and find the things to sample. And now, I'm sure you can go on some list and type in Native American drums.
yeah, right.
And you can find 500,000 songs that use Native American drums. And you
Yeah.
can click through until you find something that
Yeah.
works for you. Whereas hip hop music in the 80s were, a lot of the 70s and 60s soul songs that were there in your house and just finding records and playing things that you wouldn't have come across and finding something like you listen to the production of the Bomb Squad on the Public Enemy albums or the first Ice Cube album, and it's like there's sirens and there's a brass band and there's a break beat and there's someone wailing in the background, and it's this Miles Davis type of like jazz fusion hip hop beat. And to me, that's progressive rock. You listen to those first two, especially Public Enemy albums, and yeah, it's in 4 and they're rapping over it. But that stuff is just mind blowing. It's like, it's like The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. It's like that level of, if you actually listen to everything that's going on, you have to listen to those songs 15 times before you even hear all the things that are going on.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I feel like if you were into bands progressing, you know what I mean? You should grow with your artist and really listen and try to progress with the genre while, you know what I'm saying? Like, and appreciate it for what they did. You know what I mean? It might be, you might not be a rap fan, but we're talking right now, like if you're listening to prog, you could get into it from this angle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I feel like
Yeah.
that's an important like message to take away is like you can get into stuff from different angles, you know? Like that's how I got into rap. I got into it from different angles. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I would you know, you weave in, you're like, okay, well I like this, and then I like, you know what I mean? And oh, that samples Beastie Boys sampled Zeppelin, like that's cool. Like
Yeah.
you know, KRS-One sampled Back in Black, I gotta hear that, you know?
Yeah.
Tribe sampled the Beatles, you know? It's that's
Or
what-
how like Long Red Mountain,
Yeah.
Long Red, that drum,
Yeah, it's
that
sampled
drum
on
beat is
everything.
like one of the most
Most sampled
used,
songs
yeah,
of all
most
time,
sampled
yeah.
songs of all time, and it's mountain. It's
On-
not like it's
on time, Jack.
Yeah, right. But it's not like Mountain's a huge, you know what I mean? Like they were big in their day, they had their time, but it's not like they're like. In other words, they're if you're looking at music from just kind of like an entry level or like just I am just a casual listener of music, I don't do deep dives, whatever. Mountain isn't in the same sentence as
Zeppelin.
Zeppelin. You know what I mean? Yeah,
It's not
I
even
mean
close.
it's in. For me, it's in the same sentence, but for
Definitely.
most people, it's not. You know, so just to kind of see how like somebody went digging and found that beat and was like, "Oh, this is awesome," and then it just became the most used beat, like like in
Yeah.
hip hop. You know,
Like,
it was so easily adaptable.
I like to like how, you know, everything is moving forward, moving back in the progress at the same time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of cool too to look at.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to touch on was okay. So Jeff, you said earlier how like OK Computer
Yeah.
is an album that, you know, and I know you're a big Radiohead guy. I've done some moderate listening of Radiohead. I don't know, Luke, how you look on listening to Radiohead.
I've heard Creep.
Okay.
Oh boy.
But Jeff being a big Radiohead fan though, yeah, I mean maybe speak to that a little bit in the way that like how that what makes them progressive to you? Like what you know, what are their qualities that you would categorize them as being progressive?
Well, Radiohead is interesting because to me they kind of seem to absorb all influences and spit it back in their own way, their own, you know, view. But very progressive to me, especially because Radiohead's first album was basically like a band that loved the Smiths and wanted to play the grunge music that was popular at the time. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work for me. I never listened to that first album. Creep's on that first album. You is on that album. And that's about all I ever listened to.
Yeah.
And then the second album, they introduced more experimentation, more of the studio effects, more of the crazy guitar pedals and sounds and type of, you know, just the palette expanded beyond the loud, soft dynamics and the kind of emotionally vulnerable lyrics.
Yeah.
It became a lot of songs that were about esoteric topics. And then on their third album, they delivered the 90s version of Dark Side of the Moon, which is an album about the oppressive nature of technology and how we're all losing touch with our humanity because of the world we're living in and how everything's speeding up and we're becoming, you know, less feeling and more analytical and more like the machines. And that album uses Mellotron. There's a song on that, Paranoid Android. It's a crazy
a great
prog
song.
song suite
Yeah, it's
that
great,
has,
man.
you know, it has a rip roaring guitar solo in these crazy time signatures. It goes into this doom and gloom type of sampled Mellotron choir section, and that goes right back into the ripping guitars. It's very much like 21st Century Schizoid Man. And that was just their third album. Then their fourth album, they basically we're not using guitars anymore, or we're going to use guitars to make noises and sounds and not really play notes or play lines or play solos.
Yeah.
And they must have been listening to a lot of the German krautrock, the new, and who's the other? big
Can.
band?
Can, yeah.
And who's the other one that did Autobahn?
Oh, Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk. But they became just kind of like out there. And I think the music world at large just saw them as this like very experimental kind of like side thing that happened to have a lot of fans, but could never play on radio. Mm-hmm. Even though I know all their songs. They're my favorite band of all time.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the next album uses weird jazz things, and they just kept moving forward, progressing their sound.
Yeah.
They've to me, they've never had like a retread of old material. They're always moving forward. They're always pushing the boundary of using orchestras and, you know, all these outrageous elements when you think of they're a guitar band that made music in the 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah.
I feel like that's why they're still successful today, though, is because of the progression. That's why I think
Yeah.
it'll keep people interested, because you want to know what's coming next. You don't know what it's going to sound like.
And
Like,
it's- yeah.
not to be a jerk, but you know what that next, like, Miley Cyrus record's going to sound like, right?
Yeah.
Like, a little bit, you know, to some extent. And that's not like a dig. It's just like, it's kind of predictable.
Yeah.
You know, same with, like, okay, let's take, like, a extreme example. You know what the next Toby Keith record's going to sound like.
Yeah. But
It-
dude,
But that's why
Yeah.
in the dying format of rock, that's why that is I still feel like so relevant. You know?
yeah, I've seen it in prog metal bands where it's so like, okay, I mean, Between the Buried and Me, I mean, a decent, you know, a successful band, you know. The album I listened to recently was Colors, but you have Colors, The Great Misdirect, and then the Hyper Parallax, whatever thing. But it's like, you know, I remember when The Great Misdirect came out, and Colors like blew me away. That was in 2007, and then before that was Alaska. That had Selkies, The Endless Obsession. That was kind of like the song, kind of like being like, oh, this is what this band does. Even though the other songs on the album weren't necessarily like that, Selkies was unique in that way. It was like this long sort of like kind of, you know, song, whatever. But I remember listening to The Great Misdirect, which came out after Colors. And I remember like they released a single, and I was listening to it at a pal's house, this kid Mike. And we listened to that song, and he's like, yeah, well, now we know what the entire album sounds like. You know, in that way where you're just kind of like, yeah, you know, and that's where it's like these are bands that call themselves progressive, and their music is progressive in that analytic way, but it's not progressive in the way of like consistently changing your sound, like completely alter, like, oh, like Radiohead would be like, all right, on this album, no guitars, or if guitars, sounds, not notes. You know what I mean? Whereas a lot of prog metal bands lock themselves in this box that's basically like, oh, we have to play to this sort of a virtuistic standard, but can we really take risks? And don't get me wrong, Between the Buried and Me does take risks. They do. On some of the albums, they incorporate like these weird like circusy things. There's one that sounds, there's like one song on Colors breaks into like a weird hoedown kind of thing, you know. So they do you know, they
do get there, but it's still boxed
just
in
like,
the genre.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's something like what Radiohead, the move that Radiohead did, is very much kind of, even if they didn't intend it to be, was kind of a tip of the hat of the earlier bands of like the late 60s and 70s, where there was at one point the whole thing was like basically just like take your band and try something totally out of nowhere and weird.
Well, yeah, man.
You know, just change.
It's the Beatles, bro. It's the Beatles. Every album's different.
Right.
Every album's its own vibe.
And every song.
Yeah. On those albums are its own vibe.
Yeah.
That's I think that's where it really like for rock bands, that's the model. And even like you're talking like Radiohead, a more modern band, I'd say like My Morning Jacket for me is like one that I mean I could like get down with, and they're not like proggy in the sense of like it doesn't sound. I mean, it sometimes might sound like yes, but like it progresses forward from like the first album being like a alt country kind of psych record to like their fifth albums. You know, is like it could be like this. You know, whole. You know, it's funkier. It's like the grooves are fatter, and like it might have like some like weird. You know, the effects on the vocals might be like the whole move of the song. You know.
Yeah.
And I feel like every album of theirs sounds pretty different. Sounds like My Morning Jacket, but it's different, you know. And I feel like that's and even talking to like why they're so like, you know, that's a pretty successful band for a rock band at this point. You know, they could sell out something pretty big, but open for Bob Dylan. You know, and that's I feel like it speaks to the progression. It's like I feel like a lot of people can't articulate that, but like. And that's why we don't like a lot of the music, I feel like, that we maybe had congregated around in high school, because it is so limiting and it doesn't move, and we change as people daily, you know, hourly.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why maybe something that's more progressive is like easier, because everything changes all the time. And that's why and I don't feel like people realize this, but because everything's changing all the time, you will relate to it on a cellular level at that point. I feel, that's getting real deep with it. But,
yeah, but in the way, I think the thing that separates, to say, the men from the boys when it comes to that is how like Queen can do like their first album and then they can like write disco or something, you know what I mean? Or like, you know what I mean? In other words, it's that whole way where it's like you listen to Dark Side of the Moon and then you listen to The Wall. Very different sounding albums, but you still know that it's Pink Floyd.
Right.
Like the bands don't lose their identity even though they're playing a different style of music. And I think that is like a defining greatness quality of the great bands, is that it's just like, oh yeah, this is just Pink Floyd does this is Pink Floyd's version of disco. This is Pink Floyd's version of what, I mean, Kiss did it. I'm not saying they did it well, but Kisco, you know what I mean? Yeah. Again, I'm not saying
if we're discussing progressive rock, Kiss should never be mentioned at any time.
Let's just also talk about, this is like the third or fourth time we've brought up Kiss, because me and Mike we've been enlisted, guys. We've been enlisted a long
I
time.
party all night and some of every day.
Listen, we party all night. Jesus,
oh my God, we rock and roll all night and we party every day.
But there's a reason for it, and I think what Luke was saying is we've been enlisted.
Yeah, we've been enlisted into the army for a long time.
Yeah,
I'm a deserter.
I've served a couple tours in the Kiss Army.
Yeah, Jeff is in Kiss jail for treason.
I'm hiding out in Canada, avoiding the Kiss draft.
I want you.
Yeah, I mean, so if we're talking about progressive rock and the idea of just what you could call progressive rock nowadays,
yeah,
because
when you think prog rock, it has like the 70s, yes, Rush,
yeah,
etc.
absolutely.
Type of, that's what it was. But like, who are some of the prog rock, quote unquote, bands of the last 20 years?
Yeah, that's
like,
a question.
I can think of some that I guess I would put in that category. Like My Morning Jacket, like you said, that, yeah, definitely can belong in there because they're kind of where a jam band would meet prog rock.
Right.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But like, I've been thinking about this, and the only band I can even really think of that does prog rock in the way it was done in the 70s is a band like the Mars Volta.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we didn't talk about the Mars Volta. I wanted to talk about that.
But it's completely different music because it's not from the white European classical music. It's from the Mexican, Latin American influenced, Afro-Cuban polyrhythms type of vibe, less than the dun, 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 dun,
right.
orchestra vibe of things. But it goes in every direction. It's screaming Geddy Lee style vocals. It's drums where it sounds like the dude has 6 arms playing.
Yeah, and a lot of like weird time signatures.
Yeah, crazy start stops and doing the kind of the little carnival type of segues and those type of things. But yeah, I mean I couldn't think of any other band in the last 10 years that kind of does 70s prog rock.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like it, like in the modern era. I feel like it's almost like completely phased out, as like nobody would be like a old school hip hop modern act.
Oh yeah,
because I feel like it's dated in the
some
time.
Like LL Cool J type stuff today. I mean,
you could.
Enough time.
The only place I can go is heavier music.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
So
like what bands? Because I don't listen to a ton of heavy.
Yeah, I feel like metal just swallowed the genre, and I'm not like up on the modern metal scene.
Well, because the thing is that I think that the prog rock influence on metal also splintered off in a lot of weird ways.
Do you think? Yeah. Well, this is what I'm saying here. Like that antithesis of the 70s hard rock prog bands gave way to the metal prog, and that's how that genre kept progressing. Instead of it cutting off and then metal and then prog, there was seamlessly kind of a proggy
absolutely
move.
And I think
it progressed heavier instead of progressing to maybe its softer, folkier tendencies from the 70s.
And I think the big driving factor is the fact that it is all guitar-based stuff.
Right,
because
exactly.
guitar players dig guitar players, man. Regardless of who's playing what style or whatever, if a guitar player comes upon another guitar player, regardless of what they're playing, but it's good, you're like, okay,
yeah,
right.
So Yeah, I would say modern. Okay,
Also, the virtuoso playing of the genre is only seen really in metal today. That kind of virtuosohness, where it's it's like
absolutely.
technically so
Lots of notes.
yeah, lots of notes,
lots of
notes,
lots of
That's
notes.
the
Yeah, like a
that-
Yngwie Malmsteen theme,
that's the metal genre all day.
Yeah, I mean I'll say this. The only band that I can think of that is current that is doing anything remotely close to the original stuff would be Opeth. Because Opeth,
you've played that for me. Originally metally proggy, and then
metal,
got more like 70s
Well,
influence.
and they did it sort in a way that was kind of true to form, which was like the last album that came out, I think, was album either Ghost Reveries or Watershed, and then that was the only album they released for I think another 8 years. I think that album came out like 2001, 2002, and we didn't get another Opeth album until like 2009, maybe 8 or 9, and they were coming off of like this super radio friendly, like kind of clean. This is coming out of the school of like when Killswitch Engage was also happening. So it's like you don't even hear an inhale before the vocals are delivered. It's so polished. Everything is so crazy overproduced and polished.
Didn't you tell me analog, right? They went tape.
So he's coming out of this whole school, and Mike Eckerfeldt is the name of like the driving creative force behind Opeth, and so he basically did a hard turn and created an album that was very mellow, very incorporating a lot of like different kinds of like vibes, different sort of like percussive things going on in the album and stuff. Very murky, very like. It's basically like if you ate some bad mushrooms and ended up in the parallel universe of the Garden of Eden. I feel like that perfectly describes this album.
That was a very direct.
Yeah.
That was a very direct explanation.
Yeah, where like God runs the show in the parallel. The devil runs the show in the parallel Garden of Eden. That's what it feels like, though. It's like this really weird, hazy. It's kind of like all of the dark and evil qualities that you got from Rainbow or Black Sabbath, or even like maybe a little bit of Blue Oyster Cult in there, a little bit of like that's really spooky kind of Mellotron vibe that you get on like the B side of King Crimson, the first King Crimson album. And it was not well received initially because everyone's just like, where are my like screaming bloody gore growls and all that stuff?
Oh yeah,
and
no more screaming.
And I was just like, this is amazing because they basically took their like big Mesa Boogie stacks and threw them out the window and bought a bunch of like vintage twin reverbs and Les Pauls and Strats, and we're like, all right, let's just like try to basically write a modern day like evil Scandinavian, like, because that's the thing though, is that it's still. Their music was always categorized as kind of sounding sort of haunting and evil. You know, it's coming out of that same place of like that kind of like weird metal, that sort of gothic kind of theatrical metal scene that came out like maybe in like the early 2000s, where you had like these kind of like everyone was wearing makeup, and you know you had like the Dimmu Borgers and stuff like that, where it was like, you know, whatever. Yeah. Luke threw up some
devil horns.
But that's a good Christian boy. I listen to this kind of music.
But I would okay. You know, I veered off a little bit. I kind of went on a tangent, but I'm just saying that I think that if there is a modern band that is still giving you that sort of nuanced 70s vibe that's doing progressive music, it would be Opeth. In contrast, coming out of metal, you have guys like Tassin Abasi, who plays for
Animals as
Leaders, which that is progressive music. It, you know, in a very, very pure form, but it's a weird angle on it. It's like what's weird is like the shreddy guitar players took like the 7 and 8 string guitars from like Korn and Slipknot, and basically were like, oh, we can play bass notes and up, and we can do all these Yngwie things with both hands on an 8-string guitar.
What about Thundercat? Thundercat get thrown into like I feel like that's prog. When I listen to that, I'm like, that's prog sauce. That's noodle.
Yeah, I mean, well, Thundercat to me is we didn't touch on it, but we can take 2 minutes now. But in the 70s, the flip side of the prog rock coin to me is jazz fusion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Which we really didn't state, but like it's definitely.
We got time, baby. Let's keep.
That's
talking,
like American
we're chilling.
Blues and jazz based version of prog rock,
right?
And you know, Thundercat,
yeah,
Kendrick Lamar, current artists like that. It's jazz fusion,
Yeah.
but isn't jazz fusion kind of just like American prog rock?
Yeah. Oh, I would. Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. Yeah, man. And
not that it was just Americans playing jazz fusion, but primarily.
but it goes to show. But to tie somebody like Thundercat in with, say, modern hip hop, like going back to what we're talking about, these guys who are kind of pressing the boundaries of hip hop and how we kind of understand, like Anderson .Paak. I mean, who did Thundercat hopped on a Tiny Desk concert with? Who was it?
Oh, it was Mac Miller.
Mac Miller. Yeah. But it's like, yeah, man. Remarkable bass player.
Producers like Flying Lotus are guys who are drawing. I think Alice Coltrane's nephew. I think.
Oh yeah,
I think that's. So he's spent his whole life listening to crazy jazz fusion from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And now he's a dude who's producing for guys who are on the radio.
Yeah. And that's another influence on prog rock too. I think that we didn't really touch on was
and let's talk
the jazz angle.
Yeah, which is like we get just we're not gonna like dive deep, but like Miles Davis progressed every time. You have Miles Davis is playing with Charlie Parker. Bebop, you have the birth of cool, Miles Davis. You have hard bop. Miles Davis was an innovator in that genre. You have modal jazz, Miles Davis. Well, then you kind of have free jazz in there, that which he didn't really touch on super until he got to his second great band. But like in every point, Miles Davis was innovating his genre until he innovated from free jazzy to completely out there fusion.
Oh yeah, his fusion stuff got crazy. And then, but even right before he died too, man. If you listen to Doo-Bop, that's
Hip-hop.
Another album where you're like, oh, okay, I see what he's
doing
doing here.
He believed in innovating the genre, which is where prog was born out of, an innovation of the genre of rock.
Yeah, but I think prog rock boxed itself in.
Yeah,
whereas
that's where it
jazz
squeezed itself out.
Kind of had that ability to kind of.
I don't know.
Constantly
I think jazz, if we're talking in popular music, squeezed itself out as well, because not every jazz player. Miles Davis was out really on his own. He jumped off the cliff, and not a lot of people went with him.
Yeah, the only guy
who was in his
Sonny
band.
Rollins did some stuff.
Who was in his band at the time? Ron Carter. He was offered the job to go into the fusion, right? And he was like, I play the upright bass.
Yeah.
Get out of here, guy. And Ron Carter had a career afterwards, but none of those guys. And you look at jazz as a popular form of music, it boxed itself out, really.
Because if you listen to if you talk to any person who's just kind of a moderate listener of jazz, they're really only listening to like kind of Blue Train, maybe like Saxophone Colossus,
jazz,
just kind of like these really approachable sort of like albums,
pop jazz.
Yeah, pop jazz.
I'd say jazz today has a new rebirth. I feel like it's happening kind of right now, where you have a lot of music because everything's so accessible. Jazz is kind of innovating itself back into popular music a little bit, because like there are plenty of like great stuff being released right now that is heavily jazzy.
Yeah,
but it's also the drums are kind of maybe a little bit Neil Pearty, a little proggy.
Yeah,
And I feel like it might be coming back in that form, but like it's definitely the flip side of the coin.
Yeah,
and I mean jazz fusion. One of my favorite albums, Blow by Blow, Jeff Beck. It's crazy jazz fusion. It's special sauce on everything. It's a little bit of a whirlwind of virtuosic guitar, but Jeff Beck influenced definite prog rock dudes like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, these guitar gods
Mike
who
Portnoy.
Usually don't even play with they don't even play with a vocalist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also not Mike Portnoy. Mike Portnoy is the drummer for Dream Theater.
Oh yeah, Dream Theater.
John Petrucci is the guitar player.
Yeah, Dream Theater. Like that's a huge
prog
following.
rock.
Prog,
Yeah, and then they had another offshoot was called Liquid Tension Experiment. That was
with Tony Levin.
Yeah, that was all I think instrumental stuff. They didn't have any vocals on that. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, in terms of modern bands, say that are kind of like carrying the torch. I mean, maybe that's it. I can't really think of.
What about this idea of like, is this prog rock? Like, are the middle 4 Metallica albums prog rock?
See, I was thinking that the whole time, and I would say yes.
Like everything
Absolutely.
between Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. Those to me, those all seem like prog rock.
Especially
It's metal music,
Justice for All. And Justice for All gives you like these long sort of like saga songs. I mean, one obvious, these are concept songs, and they're long form.
Different tempos, different feels, slow parts, acoustic parts.
like is a current band today that is very much a metal band, but like is Mastodon.
Oh, I was gonna bring up Mastodon
prog
actually.
rock band.
Yeah.
Because they have 3 vocalists who all sing different style. They go in every direction.
Yeah.
And, you know, they don't have necessarily like classical music figures or things like that, but at times kind of.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. Cuz I was trying to think about maybe modern metal bands that could fall under the prog genre. Yeah, and I was thinking, okay, other than Between the Bear and Me and like Dream Theater and Opeth.
Yeah.
You know, Mastodon would definitely be up there. I mean, they at the very least on me as a very young impressionable guitar player in high school, Mastodon was just like, oh my god, you know, like, you know, very very busy, busy music.
Like I don't listen to them, but there was a time 15 years ago I listened to them for a bit. Coheed and Cambria.
Oh yeah.
Which
Oh
to
my
me
gosh,
that's like
completely
like the early 2000s emo core version
Yeah.
of Rush.
Yeah,
like,
right.
like down to how the vocals sound, to like what the structure of the songs and how it's third person perspectives of this space saga and all this mythology that I couldn't even scratch the surface. I listened to the first 3 albums, and then when I was reading all these magazines about, oh, it's so crazy the storylines they have, I was just like, I
like,
couldn't
there's a
even
story?
grasp those.
Yeah, yeah,
I had no idea. I just listened to the songs. I thought there were a lot of good songs.
Yeah.
But I didn't get into the mythology of it all. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of mythology to
Yeah.
get into. There's a whole like anime.
There's a whole
series about it.
universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking as we're talking about these bands, and you said Coheed and Cambria, I thought maybe System of a Down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely.
Yeah. And they take a lot of Frank Zappa type things, that absurdist, like
Even like
la,
the-
la, la kind of
Yeah,
pomp, pomp and circumstance. But yeah.
Also from where are they from? They're
San
not-
Diego, right?
There are Armenian immigrant
yeah.
families, and
Yeah.
so it's taking musical cues from the Middle East, and I mean, I love System of a Down, and I listen to them constantly.
Great band.
And it's
Yeah,
like
so good, man.
I guess they're a metal band, but a lot of people who listen to metal would not be able to take the absurd like spin of System of a Down.
Yeah, dude, I knew so many like people who were, you know, obviously I was in a couple metal bands here and there, you know, back in the day, whatever. The vast
Shout them out.
majority.
Name some of them.
Oh god.
I love metal band names.
All Hails Beneath.
Oh, I like that one.
This Fragile Lifeline.
Ooh.
That was the name of your band.
That was the name of one of my bands.
That's a Dashboard Confessional cover band.
Oh. Excuse me. Have some respect. We only covered Hawthorne Heights. Okay. Thank you.
Ohio was for lovers, guys.
Lost in Ruin was another one. And that was the Seether years. So everything is just like dark and depressing. Lost in Ruin. You know, we
man.
played some shows. We had some fun.
My childhood band names are really stupid.
Oh, let's hear them.
Okay, we have Stabbing Steve.
It's a ska. That sounds like a ska band.
Yeah. Heavy on the trombone.
We have what else do we rock for a minute? Today.
Oh, today.
This one never like really formed, but this was like an idea. The Extremities.
Oh, the Extremity.
That one wasn't bad. But my main one was The Quiet Room,
The Quiet Room. Yeah.
named after an Incredible Hulk episode.
Hey, man.
Wow. You guys dug deep for a name.
It's Cameron. It was Cameron. He's
Yeah.
obsessed with it.
Yeah. I don't know.
But I mean, like when you were playing metal,
Yeah.
this was 15-ish years ago,
Yep.
mid 2000s. Were you playing metal music that was very much in kind of the format of what was popular metal at that time, or were you ever in a metal band that was trying to do all these progressive type of turns?
Yeah, I would say that the complete. Okay, so the actual legitimate bands that I was in were very, very much steeped in the music at the time. It was very a la As I Lie Dying, All That Remains, Shadows Fall, Killswitch Engage, Miss May. Miss May I came later, but you know, whatever. Parkway Drive, all that stuff. There was a point when I was jamming with a friend of mine where we were really trying to kind of take the August Burns Red approach to metal, which I mean prog-esque. Like there's nuance. Like they're prog in the way to where like they maybe don't play the same riff twice in a song.
Oh,
It's
okay.
continuously moving music. There's no like verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It's very much just kind of like the song is just
Oh, that would give me anxiety.
beginning to end.
Come on, Brian Wilson over here. You should love that.
Yeah, I know, right?
There's a chorus, bro. There's a chorus.
There's a yeah, the chorus is ambient sounds on like a glass harp. You fucking, you pretentious prick. Get the fuck out of here. Yeah. We need more Tibetan prayer bowl sounds.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, never. Yeah, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say that any of the bands that I was in were like formed bands ever really kind of did anything like that. Because to be fair, I was probably the only one of the group that was just kind of like, hey man,
Let's push in this direction.
yeah, like let's see, let's check this out, let's check that out, and they're just like, nah, that's because we're trying to we're trying to do the metalcore thing.
Yeah.
We're trying to do the hardcore
You were
metalcore
lucky. You had
Boston.
people. You had
thing.
people who could play a genre of music.
Yeah.
We were all just like, well, whatever comes out, I guess that's what we sound like.
Yeah, I mean, that might be the best way to go about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a bad look.
I'm just saying, in hindsight, I would rather listen to your old bands than my old bands.
Oh, that's rough, but thank you.
You know, not that, and I'm just because it's just this is the thing, man. Is like those kinds of guitar lines to me now, the metalcore guitar lines, they're just so they're so corny. You know, it's just like chugging on the open D string because you're in drop D, obviously.
That'd be a
'cause
good
it's just
album
like
name, Chugging on the Open D.
chugging on the open D. It's Captain Ahab on the giant letter D. Yeah. Anyway, but you know what I'm saying? It's just I don't know. It's like it's corny to me now. At the time, obviously that was the shit. It was like if you weren't wearing a Killswitch Engage T-shirt, you were wearing an AC/DC Back in Black T-shirt. You know what I mean? That was kind of like for people who are like into like kind of whatever, you know. At least in my experience in high school, that was kind of the vibe. You know, and I definitely started at the Metallica end of the scale, but I finished at very much the Cannibal Corpse end of the thing, you know. So like
things.
so like and everything in between, you know what I mean. But that was the thing though, was that you know people were wearing trip pants when we were in high school, you know. So there were my wife included.
The mall goth.
Yeah,
Jade had the best pants.
Oh man.
Jade was the gothiest goth at her school, I
she
think.
was so gothy.
Other than Reed, who wore the fishnet shirt with no
nipple
shirt
pierced,
underneath.
an eyeliner, black nail polish.
Man.
You know, it was a different time, but that was very much in the you know what I mean. Like people, you weren't talking about Yes, you were talking about like the new Killswitch album or whatever. So it was like that, but that was another type of music that very much ended up becoming what I would call now as dad rock. I mean, my mom was like, "Hey, have you heard this Trivium song?" And I'm like, "Trivium? I listened to Trivium when I was like a sophomore. Like, what are you talking about?" You know? And she's like,
Get in the pit, Mom.
"Yeah, you know." And then I put on like the first Trivium album, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm not really into this." And I'm just like, "Yeah, this," and then I'm just kind of like,
because though it boxed itself out and then went more to mainstream, right?
yeah, exactly, and that's how it is. Like my parents are like going to see Five Finger, you know, well not now obviously, but they were, you know, they went to go see
Pre-COVID.
pre-COVID, went to go see like Five Finger Death Punch and stuff, and I'm like, my mom is going to see like this genre of music that when I was listening to it in high school, they're like, you know, gosh, Mikey's really angry these days, huh? And I'm just like, you need to read the lyrics, Mom. They're about love and loss, like all that stuff. And they're like, you're an idiot.
All he
And now
wanted was a Pepsi.
Well, no, and now my parents are like, hey, man, you know, that new whatever song is killer. And I'm just, Avenged Sevenfold's another one that they're like really into. And I'm just like, oh yeah, Unholy Confessions, like the, you know, and I of course I cite like the first two albums. And they're like, no, not that stuff. Like later on,
Still going strong, I guess.
Yeah, no, they
don't
definitely
know.
are. They definitely are. We kind of veered off the prog rock thing here, but it's
How about turn? I feel like we're talking progression, really.
Well, and to bring
Yeah.
it back to prog rock, is it possibly the case that we're talking about music from our teen years, basically,
Yeah.
late 2000s? Did prog rock kind of miss our generation? Because we talked about how music gets passed down possibly from your parents' collection, but like,
Yeah.
my dad didn't listen to Rush and Yes, and
Yeah.
like my parents listened to late 70s era disco music.
Yeah.
Like Earth, Wind and Fire and Chic and Chicago. And so I never was exposed to prog rock
Yeah.
until I sought it out when I was 13, 14 years old. And I think that's the case for maybe a lot of people of our generation, because prog rock for teenagers in the 70s was kind of this like Dungeons and Dragons kind of secret thing you didn't really tell people about that you're into.
Yeah, right.
So maybe like 1 out of every 10 dads listened to that when they were teenagers.
Yeah.
And then it gets like less likely to be passed down in a musical tradition.
Well, I think especially with us too, the way that we consumed music, whereas generations of the past, like their parents just always had records and stuff. Where the new, for us, I mean, the hip way of consuming your music was Napster, was all that. You know what I mean? And it was much more.
Yeah, you were
listening to what everybody else was listening to at
Exactly.
the time, rather than being like, I'm doing a deep dive on my
You
dad's record.
mean Creed songs that were mislabeled on Napster as by Metallica?
Yeah,
Because that's what I was listening to.
yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like pixely, like.
Or is that It's My Life by Metallica? And it's the Bon Jovi song. Like that.
Yeah. Terribly labeled.
every reggae song, like it's Bob Marley songs labeled Sublime. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it missed our generation.
Yeah, the only
Absolutely.
time I'd say and again, like what we kept going back to was how prog just kind of like rode the metal train. That's kind of how I got into prog, was because I heard off the album Alaska, Selkies, that Between the Buried and Me song, and I was like, oh, this is so different, and it's moving in a different kind of a direction. And at first, I don't really think I understood it, but that was the door that opened me up, I think, to considering even listening to prog rock from the jump. And then also, like, my mother, who was a huge Doors fan, and so it's kind of like those two things. Like, I was like really into metal and stuff, but like I grew up listening to my dad listened to Queensryche heavily, so there's already that kind of thing happening. And then, the appreciation for maybe like an older sound that the Doors gives, and it's kind of like, well, where's the middle ground in that? I mean,
And the Doors has some of those seeds of prog rock, because it a lot of it functions around the classical arpeggios and all that of the keyboard.
I would say the Doors get classified as art rock, which would get classified later as prog rock.
And
That was the art of the day.
And it sounds like harpsichord and organ craziness.
Yeah, and they would play like kind of maybe what you might call like a traditional American drinking song on an album or something like that. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
So
no, I dig that.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think
turn, guys. To everything there is a season.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that about wraps it up for prog rock. We've gone for almost 2 hours, so this is a good,
It's our longest one.
It's not. It's the only thing that's longer is a Neil Peart drum solo, and we need a gong.
Can we, real quick before we end the show, though, Jeff, we like to do a little thing. Is like, what have you been listening to lately? What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say even before that, let's Jeff plug your band Peerless Poppers.
Oh,
what's
yes.
going on with that?
Oh yeah, man.
Jeff is a guitar player over here,
Yes,
singer.
he is.
Yeah, I'm in a funk rock band called the Peerless Poppers. We're based here in Connecticut, in Eastern Connecticut. Live music kind of is shut down worldwide, but we're playing a festival next week in Maine, in Brunswick, Maine, called Summer Jam Camp Out 2020. Check out the website, summerjamcampout.com, or the Facebook page, Peerless Poppers. That's the band. So yeah.
Yeah.
Right
Support your
on.
local music.
And
guys.
Mike played with us this past weekend. Mike joined us for
I did.
guitar and percussion.
Yeah.
Right on.
I think I played much more effectively on percussion than I did on guitar. Dude, I was telling Jeff, I was like, oh, I'm so rusty.
Sloppy noodles.
Slop jalop, dude. And everything I played was soaked in delay.
And like long timed, long repeat delay.
Yeah.
My
and just like
favorite-
Very Pink Floyd.
single note. Yeah, because the thing was, I picked my guitar up and I'm like, I haven't played guitar in like 5 months. This feels just like a foreign object in my hand. So I'm like, well, let's. And then my amp busted.
Oh.
It didn't work. I plugged it in. Didn't work, whatever. So I had to plug into the amp that Jeff was using. And not to get into like amplifiers
got
and the way they
muddy.
react and everything. But things got a little bit muddy. EL34s react a little bit differently than whatever the ones are that are in Fenders. AX12, 7s, whatever. Anyway, the point is that if you play a tube amp, you as a guitar player are very used to the reactivity of said tube amp. And when that changes, it trips you up a little bit. And then you add not playing for 5 months. And that basically means I'm just going to throw on the big muff and put on crazy delay and just make a bunch of noisy sounds over stuff because I'm like, well.
I guess that's what that just means to Mike.
Hey, I make noises very well.
I'll
Thank
just
you very
say
much.
Mike went to detuning the low E string.
Oh, man.
He went to that move only like 3 songs in.
Oh my god! By the way, when Mike pulled off the first detuning solo,
that was genuine.
Blew,
That was
blew
genuine.
minds. That blew minds.
That was a genuine moment. I'll give you
I
that.
think
But any
I watched a
recreation after
hippie
now
girl
just
almost
doesn't
fall
feel-
to the floor in conniption.
Yeah.
Man.
Ah!
Oh, that was a lot of fun. But yeah, now when I do it, as I'm doing it, I'm just like, oh, this is so stupid. Because like when a magical musical moment actually happens and it's pure, it's profound. But every time you do it after that, it's like cheesy, and you're like, why am I doing this thing again?
Yeah, that's why Pete Townsend don't want to smash his guitar, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so real quick, we're not going to take a whole bunch of time up doing this, but
Yeah.
Jeff, what have you been listening to lately?
I've been listening to a lot of stuff recently. Brand new albums from one of my favorite current bands, Haim, who was a trio of sisters based in California. It's great 80s pop, kind of like Fleetwood Mac, but a little bit of everything. A new album by Krunbin, which is this mystical, sexy, laid-back R&B funk music. I think out of Houston, Texas.
What was that called?
Krunbin. It's spelled
Krunbin. I just listened to that album, too.
Khrungbin. I believe it's a Turkish word, or the Thai or Turkish word for airplane. Maybe it's Thai. Maybe.
Oh,
that's
right
what
on.
it is.
It's really good though.
Beautiful
Really
music.
good.
Yeah, Krunbin. And then I'm listening to some of my standbys, which are Frank Ocean, Snarky Puppy, Ghost Note, Wolfpack. But yeah, I've been digging back into the Marvin Gaye and the Miles Davis and a lot of that 70s, early 70s music, late 60s, especially soul music, because current times, it's good to look back at the music that came out during other troubled times when you're going through these kind of times. So but yeah, that's what I'm listening to.
Nice. Luke?
I really kind of went on a rap kick this week. Listened to some Biggie.
Oh, nice.
I listened to some ODB. Listened to some Wu-Tang.
Cool, man.
Some Tribe. So I've kind of been riding that vibe. Just listening to a little bit, trying to expand my hip hop taste a little bit, trying to learn my hip hop history, if you will. A little more. I've spun some NWA. Those are stuff that I'm a little more familiar with, but like the ODB was like maybe something I wasn't so familiar with, so I spun that and I enjoyed it. And then I definitely put on Wu-Tang, which Mike plays all the time for me, but it never really quite sticks. But I really got into some Wu-Tang this week. So
yeah, 36 Chambers?
oh yeah, man, Kill Bees.
You got to listen to the new Run the Jewels album.
Yeah, is that where it's
good.
at?
Yeah, it's really good.
It's like Public Enemy.
I'll have to give it a spin.
of
Yeah.
2020.
I like all the Run the Jewel stuff, but yeah, that new
Yeah,
album, it's good. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Right on. What you got, Mike? What you got?
I bought a couple of records
Oh yeah,
recently.
let's hear about 'em.
The Shags.
The Shags, philosophy of the world,
Talk about progressive.
better than the Beatles.
Progressive puke. Yeah, I picked up a couple.
Degressive.
Regressive.
Degressive.
Degressive. I picked up a couple albums. I got this album by a man named David Bromberg. Actually, remember I took a picture and I was like, "Hey man, have you ever seen this album before?"
Yeah. By the way, I saw like 5 albums after that on Instagram, so our phones are definitely listening.
Oh, jeez, Big Brother, baby. Well, yeah. Anyway,
What was the name again?
David Bromberg. Bromberg.
What is that kind of music?
It's like it came out in 72. Some of the musicians that are on it that did a couple sessions, some session work for the album, include members of the Grateful Dead. I think Jerry's on it. I don't know, Bob Weir's on it. But it kind of has that like there's definitely like some folk influence, even though there's kind of like some rockers on it too. There's definitely some folky vibes, kind of Irish influenced folky vibes.
Okay.
And it's worth a listen. It's cool. The lyric is delivered in a way that's more like talking on, kind of Dylan-esque, or like who was the other one? Not like the timbre of Leonard Cohen, but you know what I mean, like that.
Sure.
Kind of like more like talky singing.
Tom Waits.
Or Tom Waits, maybe. Yeah. So like
Tom Waits.
talking on pitch kind of thing, like that kind of a vibe. And it was okay. I mean, it's not totally my cup of tea, but I mean,
Something new.
Yeah, something new. And let me think, what else did I pick up? I just picked up the band's Moondog Matinee.
Oh yeah.
I love the band.
Good album, man.
It's a covers album.
Yeah, it was only only a couple bucks, but I don't know. I thought it really delivered. I really liked it. I thought it was.
I love the vocal effect on that first song there. Where he's like I could sing like a frog, and it's got the it's got that like vocoder he's like I love it.
Probably ran it through like a Leslie speaker or something.
Yeah, it like goes like this. It's like
and one strange cocaine fueled binge.
Yeah,
Let me do this.
That album sounds to be like the album that Coke built.
Yeah. And another album that I thought was a standout album that I bought, and for anyone who's listening, Luke has vouched for it as well. Pretty much any of these like 75th reissue Blue Note albums that you can purchase online or at your local record store.
Oh, they're usually really good.
They're all. I mean, there's no. Yeah, I
don't even know what they are, and I'll just be like, I'm in the mood to listen to some jazz, and I'll buy one at the record store when I go.
And they're super for like the thing is, man, is like, listen, I am a product of like the early 2000s in the way that I was used to going out and spending like $25 on a CD. So, and that's what I love about these represses is that they sound great. They're the Rudy Van Gelder like remasters. And all that, and they just sound awesome. And I picked up Wayne Shorter's Night Dreamer.
Okay.
And great album, man. Really, really good. And I actually I posted a thing to my Instagram of the liner notes on the back.
Right.
And Jeff actually commented on it because it was I'm trying to remember what it said, but basically it was kind of like this album is kind of. It's kind of looking at the world. There's, I think, one of the names of the album, one of the names of the songs on the album is Armageddon. And the interviewer was like, "Armageddon, isn't that kind of like a grim way of looking at the world or whatever?" And he's like, "I don't." It was something to the effect of Wayne Shorter commenting and being like, "I don't think that Armageddon necessarily means our destruction. I think Armageddon is like the awakening of human beings." Oh. And I'm just like,
right on, guy.
This, you know what I mean? Yeah, and that's on the back of a jazz album, and it makes sense though, because then you look at like a Love Supreme, and you open up that gatefold, and you're like, oh my God, all praise be unto God, like this very spiritually influenced thing. And
very spiritual,
very spiritual, very spiritual,
hypnotic.
So yeah, those are just a couple albums that I've been listening to. That Wayne Shorter album is amazing. Check it out, or any other of the Blue Note repress albums are fire. And on that album, it was between that and Speak No Evil, right? That's the other Wayne Shorter album. I think it's called Speak No Evil. I went with Night Dreamer on the one basis that Lee Morgan is on Night Dreamer, but he is not on See No Evil. So I was like, well, if Lee Morgan's on it, then if I'm going to spend $25, I'll spend the $25 on the one that Lee Morgan's on. That's not a knock on Speak No Evil, because I think that's probably his, that was, if Wayne Shorter had a most popular album, I think See No Evil will probably be it. But Night Dreamer rips, man. It plays great.
I'll have to check that out.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful album, so I really enjoy
it. Get your jazz on.
Get your jazz on, people.
Definitely.
Anyway, so I think that about wraps it up. Want to thank Jeffrey for coming out and
Jeff
doing
May.
the podcast
Thanks, guys.
with
This
us.
was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope we will be seeing you again. We enjoy talking to you and stuff, and we hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. We're constantly trying to think up fun stuff to cover and things to do. As always, if you have any suggestions, any questions, comments, or anything like that, you can find us at getinthegaragepodcast@gmail.com.
Yup.
You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, all the stuff.
Yeah.
So until next time, guys.
Get in the garage.
Get in the garage. Bye-bye.